Our text is from Isaiah 55. So shall my word be that goes forth from my mouth. It shall not return to me void, but it shall accomplish what I please, and it shall prosper in the thing for which I sent it. So last week we celebrated Independence Day, the 4th of July, a day that holds happy memories for most of us, and one that stands for important things about our lives and about our country, such as the concepts of freedom and equality. The Declaration of Independence, which was announced on that day, had real consequences for this nation. And the story of how it came to be written and what happened after it was declared and what is written in it is repeated to us regularly, giving us a perspective on our country and its origins and what it is that we stand for. And these kinds of accounts have a greater impact on us than we may appreciate. Our whole thought process is changed by the things that we're taught and by the things that we believe. And this is what the Lord is saying to us about His Word in our text from Isaiah. So shall my word be that goes forth from my mouth. It shall not return to me void. It shall accomplish what I please, and it shall prosper in the thing for which I sent it. That is, the Lord's words have a mission. They have a purpose. And He's saying this mission will be accomplished, and it will prosper. And then He compares His word to the water cycle, falling as rain or snow from the sky, watering the earth and making it bring forth and bud. And we know that the water then evaporates, returns to the sky, and repeats the cycle. And the Lord's words also return to Him. But He says they won't return to Him void. That is, they won't return to Him without accomplishing anything. They will accomplish what I please. And so when they return to Him, they return to Him in the form of love. Our love for Him, our love for each other. And what they accomplish is the happiness of humanity, a heaven from the human race, a kingdom of uses. Our topic this morning is how this happens. Now, we are told that the word of the Lord has unspeakable power. As we read to begin the service, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all the host of them by the breath of His mouth. And this is explained in the Arcana Celestia number 5272, where it says, scarcely anyone has any other idea of divine truth than this: a word or utterance issuing from a speaker's mouth and transmitted into the air. This idea about divine truth leads to the notion that the word means simply a command, and that all things that have been made exist solely because a command has been delivered, not because of some reality that came forth from the Lord. But the divine truth going forth from the Lord is the ultimate reality and essential being from which all things derive their existence. Every form of what is good and true owes its existence to this. In short, divine truth holds all power within itself so completely that it is power itself. Now, this is the reality, but this is not necessarily the way that it seems. In Genesis chapter 15, Abram complains to the Lord that he has no children, and the Lord reassures him that he will. And the meaning is that it often seems that the truth does not bear fruit, and that genuine goodness will not come from what the Lord teaches in the Word. But the Lord reassures us that it will. He said to Abram, "Look now towards heaven and count the stars, if you are able to number them." And he said to him, "So shall your descendants be." And he believed in the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness. That is, the truth will bear fruit in goodness so great that we can't even count it. And it's important for us, therefore, to believe it. And this is why Luke begins his gospel the way that he does. As we read in our lesson, Luke begins his gospel with the explanation that he's going to set out an orderly account of what happened. He says that he has had a good understanding, he says a perfect understanding, of everything about it from the very beginning, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to us. And he then proceeds to tell us the story, quote, "that you may know the certainty of those things in which you were instructed." And notice that Luke is not telling Theophilus here, who he's addressing, he's not telling Theophilus anything that he thinks that Theophilus doesn't already know. He's reinforcing what he's been told, that you may know the certainty of those things in which you are instructed. The truth is that the things that we believe require constant reinforcement. When we come to church, or when we attend a doctrinal class, or when we read directly from the Word or some collateral literature, we often have the thought that we're going to learn something. We're going to learn something today. We're going to hear something new. And yet, we know we often don't hear or read new things. Instead, we hear the same things over and over again, and it can even be irksome. And yet, there is tremendous value in the things that are repeated to us. In a recent Wall Street Journal podcast, a political commentator named Yoram Hazony points out this. He says, "Those things that are not discussed in public, that are not honored and endorsed in public by the leadership constantly and repeatedly, are things that come to be dishonored." Again, those things that are not discussed in public, that are not honored and endorsed in public by the leadership constantly and repeatedly, are things that come to be dishonored. He's saying that the things that are stated in public and by extension in church and other venues constantly and repeatedly are the things that are honored and endorsed. In church, we continually remind people of the things that we see as true and valuable. By contrast, if there are significant ideas that used to be mentioned but no longer are, we may wonder if they're still believed. It's one thing, for example, to know that this church, the general church of the New Jerusalem, is founded on the belief that the theological writings of Emanuel Swedenborg are divine revelation and are authoritative in all doctrinal matters. It's another thing to hear this stated repeatedly and endorsed in times when there are doubts about it. And points of emphasis in any organization will tend to change over time. But if we are not reminded of this founding principle, we may slip into the belief that other factors may be of equal value in discussing the matters of the day. Now, propaganda is a powerful tool. The war in Ukraine has shown us all how even the most blatant falsehoods can be persuasive to millions of people if they are repeated often enough and widely enough, especially in a place where there is not freedom of speech. Now, the writings are emphatic about the value of freedom of speech and the value of a free press. And yet, even with a free press, the information that is most widely publicized among us can sometimes also amount to one-sided propaganda. And so it's good for all of us to look to varying sources for information and to see things from different points of view. But what we may not realize is that we absorb whatever it is we frequently hear and read. Even though we feel that we can tell what is true and what is not, or what leads to good and what does not lead to good, we can be deceived. Constant exposure changes our thinking. And this is part of the message of our text. Just as the rain and snow come down from heaven and water the earth, so the Lord's word is continually coming down from him and is continually having its effect. If we willingly expose ourselves to it, we will be affected. That is, we'll be affected in a good way, not like propaganda, but as something that frees us from the effects of propaganda. And while the mechanism may seem similar, the effect of the word on our thinking is completely different. And the thing that makes it different is that the word comes directly from the Lord, and its truths hold his love within them. In our minds, they are what the writings call vessels, receptive of the good of love from the divine. They are vessels receptive of the good of love from the divine. And this means that when we are exposed to them, and especially when we believe, love, and do them, the angels associated with them affect everything about our lives in positive ways. It improves our judgment. It softens our heart. It inclines us to love and to help other people. It makes us free. And this is how formal religion works, attempting to create an environment that leads people to hear, accept, and love what the Word teaches in the belief that this will change our lives. And this is also why we have new church schools, why we have summer camps, and similar things where children and adults can learn these things in an environment that's loving, that encourages moral, kind, and useful behavior. Now, the point of Luke's introduction to his gospel is to reassure people about the truth of what they have heard. And similarly, Swedenborg frequently asserts that what he is writing is the truth. One of the key assertions of the heavenly doctrine is that it is composed of, quote, spiritual truths rationally understood that are advanced by the Michaels of whom the new church is formed. And by rationally understood, it means that it can be fully explained so that it could be understood and believed. But belief is not an easy thing. And the lack of it was said in our lessons to be the, quote, single evil that has afflicted every church from the beginning. We read, it is the evil of not believing in the Lord or the Word, but trusting oneself and one's senses. The result is an absence of faith, and when faith is absent, so is love for others, a situation that leads to all falsity and evil. Because love is always the most important thing, but the lack of belief takes love away and prevents it from being implanted. And what's more, the passage continues saying, conditions are much worse today than they once were. People can now employ knowledge unavailable to our ancestors in justifying the skepticism bred by their senses. And in doing so, they produce so great a darkness that it could never be described. That is, our confidence in science has become so great that we want to employ it in answering moral and ethical questions where it actually sheds no light. And it leads us to be skeptical of the teachings of the Word and really to ignore spiritual questions altogether. We read in the Arcana Celestia 127 that people's desire to rely on sensory evidence or secular knowledge when investigating religious mysteries caused the fall of the earliest church. But more than that, it causes the fall of every church because it breeds not only falsities, but also wickedness in life. And the reason it breeds wickedness in our lives is because science simply doesn't concern itself with moral issues, especially when their harm is not easy to actually demonstrate. And so it's important to believe in what the Word teaches. We read in the Arcana number 8939 that the Word is the one and only teacher of how a person should live in the world in order to be happy forevermore. And so when the Lord promises that His Word will not return to Him void, but shall accomplish what I please, it's this happiness that He is referring to. That is, people will understand and believe, they will do as He teaches, and they will find happiness. And while there are many obstacles to belief, and while it sometimes seems as though few people actually do believe, the future is in the Lord's hands. His sheep hear His voice, and He knows them, and they follow Him. Abram worried about having an heir, but the Lord showed him the stars in the heavens, and he was reassured, and he believed Him. We close with the words of Isaiah, "You shall go out with joy and be led out with peace. The mountains and the hills shall break forth into singing before you, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands." Amen.